I'm going to call this meeting, this work session of the Monroe County Council to order. The date is Friday, August 16, 2024, here in the Nat U Hill room at the Monroe County Courthouse. We are joined today by counselors here in person. And to my right, we've got Counselors Munson, Counselor Hawk, Counselor McKim, and over here to my left, we've got Counselor Iverson, Counselor Wiltz, and Counselor Crossley. And I'm Trent Deckard, at-large member. So we have an agenda that has been prepared for us. This is a work session, and just for any member of the public that's watching or cares to watch later, a work session is an opportunity for the council to come together outside a formal meeting and to work on an issue or a subject and try to make some way with the issue or sort through issues or get to additional information that members need. The whole purpose of a work session, I know there's a lot of variations in the community, is to do sort of that work sleeves up. That's why you see us sitting in a different formation than we normally sit. And the goal is to let us have that candid conversation back and forth and the public to watch us in that. This community has a correctional justice question that has been before it for some time. It's been before us since I first joined this council in 2019, and it's been before us even before then. And while the discussion has largely been in several different ways and entities across the board, it comes to the council to figure out on behalf of the taxpayers how we will afford and fund and prioritize the values of justice in the community moving forward. We know that our current correctional facility, our current justice building, so to speak, has a lot of issues that have been well documented in the public. The sheriff has spoken very elaborately to that. Prior sheriffs have spoken pretty elaborately to that, as well as various elected leaders, organizations, et cetera. That correctional facility has been in use since 1986. Today's goal is for the council to talk through these agenda items. I'm going to run through them just a second to make sense of what we know based on advice from FSG, who joins us virtually, to make sense of potential timelines that we have. You'll see a proposed timeline that's been prepared by the Commissioner's Administrator, Ms. Angie Purdy, as well as Jeff Cockrell with the County Legal. And then to begin to talk about impact to taxpayers based on early estimates that we have, and then open it up for council discussion. And specifically with that, here in a moment, I'll discuss sort of this timeline that's been prepared by Mr. Cockrell and Ms. Purdy. Ms. Turner-King is going to talk to us about the income tax procedure. She's prepared some slides that sort of illustrate that with the timelines. And then we will, the auditor can discuss the impact to taxpayers, because a consistent question we have to consider, and it's before this body pretty exclusively, is the cost to taxpayers. We represent them in this matter. And then we'll open to jail funding discussion. And I think as Ms. Turner-King talks about timelines, I was running through her slide deck this morning. It's pretty complicated, the timelines. It requires a lot of urgency on the part of all the bodies, all the entities involved, and that may help illuminate sort of where we go in our comments and discussion, okay? Before we move on, I do need to adopt the agenda that we have. Counselors, anything you want to add to this that's not on here? Counselor Iverson.
President Deckard, I don't wish to add an item to the agenda, but only as a point of order to remind the public that all the documents that we're looking at are available on the county's website. So you can follow along, because as you mentioned, this is dense stuff and it's important to have what we're looking at available to the public as well. Absolutely.
And you know, I would be not appropriate this morning if I didn't thank Counselor Iverson and the members of JFAC, our committee that has been looking at these issues more centered than all of us in that process, including Counselor Wilt and Counselor Crossley. So I appreciate that. And those items are posted, correct, Courtney? Thank you. Awesome. All right. So any other item for the agenda this morning? All right, I'll take a motion to adopt the agenda.
So move.
Counselor Munson moved it. Counselor McKim seconded it. Any discussion on the agenda? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the agenda is set. Let's start this first by taking a look at this Justice Complex timeline. And Michelle, if you can share that. And again, this is a document as it's being pulled up. This was drafted by Commissioners Administrator Angie Purdy as well as Mr. Cockrell from County Legal. And this is largely based on council requests. Council said over and over, we want to see a timeline. And we want to see it in a real simple sort of one-page format to get our heads around the scope. The timeline makes some assumptions. I'm not articulating those assumptions to fully validate them, but that's where the starting point was, is assumptions work. Number one, that DLZ will initiate a conceptual design and master planning work based upon the property and the purchase agreement around September 1st, and that the project budget that is specified here is around $200 million. That number three, co-location of facilities occurs at the same time in this. And that's been a theme that we have heard echoed throughout our system. 4, at least monthly meetings with staff will occur during the project. And from those assumptions, again, that's a starting point for this timeline. It doesn't mean this will be the timeline. It just means the working from what we have so far. We have a range of dates that take place that include August 2024, phase 2 environmental complete on North Park, on into a purchase agreement completion, on into our portion specifically where we would begin the public hearing around we would do a tax notice, we would do a public hearing on a potential tax increase to taxpayers, whatever that amount we would determine to be, and then a deadline for us to get that done with a date certain of October 31st. And Ms. Turner King will go through why that deadline would matter. It's not the end all be all deadline, but it could be based upon when we would like to see revenues of any potential increase start to come in. It then goes into a next phase, which is a little bit out of the council's bailiwick, but more into the design phase. We've got pre-design, conceptual plan, master plan being presented to the county by DLZ. We've got more planning processes, schematic designs on into June of 2025, where a final design and budget will be presented to the county. It then moves into the bonding phase. So the bonding process begins in August of 2025. Bids go out, bids are received, and then a close on bonds in March of 2026. You probably noting we're starting to get some years out. This goes on into construction beginning April of 2026, construction being completed in December of 2029. And so that is some years out. That's the kind of scale we're talking about, and ultimately functions moving to new facility, co-located facility in 2030. Mr. Cockrell told me this morning he has a bond council schedule that matches roughly these deadlines, and we appreciate that knowledge here as we go into this. So this is a potential timeline. Ms. Turner King, when she gets into our portion of funding options, we'll discuss a little bit more specifically how that would play out, but this is sort of the scheme of the project. So anyone believing that tomorrow morning they would see a new justice facility, correctional facility being constructed, it's got some years out, and that kind of gives you a scope. And when you think of time in county government, a year can go quick, but this is a few years, more than a few years in that process. I'm going to stop at that. I've talked too much already, and I want to see, is there any questions or discussion on this? And I'll do my best to try to either answer or get to other answers, maybe outside. Councilor McKim.
Is there,
are we assuming that there will be two separate bonds, one for jail and one for other than jail, or would this all be one bond with multiple payment sources?
Mr. Cockrell, why don't you come up and handle that? Thank you so much.
And I think that goes to whether there's more than one funding source. If there's only one funding source, there'd be one bond. But if there were different funding sources with different restrictions on how they could be used, then you would need multiple bonds, one for each different restricted funding use.
So the jail tax would essentially require.
Yes, you would need that because that amount could only go towards the jail portion of the construction budget. So we'd want to track that to make sure it all fell in line.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Councilor Hawk.
Yes, I saw on the assumptions that we would be going by the property that has already been established that commissioners are working on right now because it's saying purchase agreement. I don't have it memorized, but it said September 1. And I believe there's more than one of us who would like for us to consider another property. And so I think that portion has to be considered.
Yeah.
I'm seeing some people shaking their heads yes. So
Yeah.
you're not leaving me out there by myself. Thank you.
No, that's a very good and fair point, Councilor Hawk, in that these assumptions start kind of prior based on the North Park property, so to speak. That definitely would change this mix. One thing that I think the council has to put its focus to as we start to move forward is around the funding mechanisms regardless of property.
Yes.
And so that's,
I think that's good.
while it's confusing to us and no doubt shamefully confusing to the public, and I hate that, it's, as I often say, the muddiness of the process of trying to figure out the public policy. But that is a really good point about potential for other property. Mr. Cockrell?
Yeah, and I don't want to diminish anything. So I would say that that September 1st deadline was picked more because that is when I think DLZ will be either through or close to through with the sheriff. So that's when they could actually, if we had a site allocated, start designing on the site. So that's another reason that September date was chosen, is that would probably be the date where if we don't hit it by, then DLZ is ready to go and has no work to do. So I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, thank you. Councilor Wiltz, I see you.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. So is it reasonable then to assume that that the dates would just trickle forward, say from purchase agreement completed, perhaps if on whatever property. So if that didn't happen until December, I don't want that to happen. I'm just asking what the impacts of considering this other property or pursuing it would have on this timeline.
Well, I would say, and I will say this as I'm not sure what I'm about to say is correct.
Okay.
Right? But I would assume that if we analyzed it and had DLZ beginning working on any property September 1, I mean, there's just more risk in choosing a property you haven't done all the work for, the environmentals. There's more risk there, right? So really that design element is the key. You can see in my timeline, closing on the project doesn't end or doesn't really happen until December of 2024 with this timeline. I just think you push that out, right? If you did not begin that, then I don't think it necessarily is a one-to-one, because if you notice, we have construction beginning in April 2026. If you push that out 6 months till October, November 2026, I don't think you can start construction in October or November of 2026 because of the construction season. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one there as you push it further out.
Got it. That makes sense.
And one thing just to kind of offer is probably not the right term, but the malleableness, the flexibility of all of this has got a lot. There's a lot going on here with that will probably adjust, flex around, move around, and all that. For our end of it, the council is very unique in that we have the malleable flexibleness to consider for the taxpayer. And so anything that helps perform the service at a cost that is better, more palatable, more doable for taxpayers, that's kind of where we flex in there. So I think that's the root of some of these questions and considerations. And when folks are concerned that we're moving slow on something, no, we're doing our job, and that's what we do. Councilor Iverson.
Thank you, President Deckard. First, I want to clarify my previous statement. The timeline that staff worked so hard on is now available. You can find it on the calendar at co.monroe.in.us. So that just got uploaded. So now you can review that, particularly as we're talking about all these dates. The second thing I wanted to mention is to thank you, President Deckard, for making this happen. This timeline is of great benefit to the public because it gives people a sense of how long this process is. And I think this is something that, we have been asking for. It's here. Thank you. Yep. Government works. You got it done. Thank you. And the last thing that I want to say is we do have justice partners and treatment partners watching right now. And this really helps clarify those conversations as we move forward. So I'm get on to the co.monroe.in.us and download this document or look at it. And thank you for making this happen.
Well, I'd like to say I authored all of that, but I did not. I appreciate very much Mr. Cockrell, Ms. Purdy, in getting it. Councilor Wiltz, I cut you off, and I apologize.
You did not cut me off,
okay.
But thank you. I have a couple of questions, but I'm trying to do them one at a time. I'd like to understand a little bit more about the assumptions list and specifically number 4. Does that include monthly meetings with council staff?
I think we put that in there to acknowledge that those were going to happen, but we weren't going to put it in the timeline, right? So we kept it vague on purpose. During the construction phase, typically you'll have a meeting every other week with the people with county representation, as well as our architect, our construction manager.
Sure.
And so that's to acknowledge that. Clearly, I think that when you look at the presentation of design, conceptual plan, master plan, they're going to be meeting with choreographs and the transition team. We know that's going to happen. And so we were trying to keep it on one page, or as close to one page as we could. And so we wanted to just acknowledge in the assumptions that those types of meetings will happen. They're going to happen at least monthly. So there is a frequency there, but we didn't want to, we didn't know how to put it in there without making the council staff is more than welcome to come. Commissioner staff is more than welcome to come to a lot of these meetings. I know that they're meeting, that DLZ is meeting with the sheriff's office on a pretty regular basis. They're all on my calendar. I don't know what value I add to it, so I don't go. But I'm aware of what's going on, and I'm assuming that that's not just me on that list.
I'm not on it, but that's okay. I don't need to be involved at that level, for sure. I'm just curious what was meant by some of these assumptions, and if any of these other things change, that's going to impact some of these dates, I'm guessing. I do have one specific question, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
I was under the impression that if we were to do anything for implementing a tax that affects other taxing units and bodies in the county, there was an August date by which we had to inform the other taxing units. And I don't see that on here. And I'm assuming, I guess why? And is that still a thing?
Ms. Turner-King, do you want to handle that one?
Yes. The August 1st deadline would not apply here because the August 1st deadline comes from Indiana Code 3.637, And it is referencing when the tax is adopted by a local income tax council. So like if we made an adjustment to PS Lit, we would be giving the other taxing units notification by August 1st, or if there was a change to the edit, for example. But since this is not passed by a local income tax, the August 1st deadline does not apply.
Thank you.
I've got Councilor Crossley, and then I'll go to Councilor Munson. Did you have some?
I have it. Go ahead.
I'll
Finish
go
this
Crossley,
roundup.
I'm just
Munson,
trying
Hawk.
to respond to what
Thank you.
she's wrong.
I guess in thinking about the original reason why we're all here is because we had the ACLU lawsuit filed against us in 2008. And many moons ago led us to this point. In doing my research and taking a look and looking, helped me to understand in terms of deadlines and timelines. What I see is we were supposed to have the lawsuit dismissed in 2024. What is the new, what is the new deadline for ACLU for us to figure all of this out?
Councils, do you have any?
I'm not sure there's a specific deadline. I guess
Mm-hmm.
our agreed order has been extended on an annual basis for a while, right? And what I've heard from the Indiana Civil Liberties Union is as long as we're making progress towards correcting the issues, that they are going to be comfortable, right? And so in this timeline, I would suspect that as we move forward through these marks, we'll go to the ACL or the ICLU, I think it is, and we'll just say, hey, here's where we're at. Here's our timeline. We may be able, if we get this kickstarted yet this year, we may be able to talk to both the judge and the ICLU to say, hey, we've got a 5-year plan here, right? That's what this is. It's it's basically a 5.5-year plan. And we may be able to talk them into extending it for more than 1 year or something like that. We've been going year to year, I think primarily based upon the fact that we're not showing a lot of progress towards our goal.
Yeah. And I think my other point to that too is considering that we have another site that a lot of, like Councilor Hawk was saying, I think some of us are very much interested in and taking a look at. I'm just trying to figure out how we can involve them in this process, because if we are considering a new site potentially, obviously this timeline and deadline also would be affected by that as well. So I think for us, and as a fiscal body member, it makes me feel comfortable. It would make me feel comfortable, rather, if we can have ACLU in some kind of way be involved so that they understand that we are truly trying to make progress, but we are trying to do our due diligence and making sure that we are doing things diligently with taxpayers' dollars. So I think that that's a big concern for me when we look at deadline and whatnot. Thank you.
That's a really good point. When it comes to the constitutionality of the jail, I think the sheriff has talked about this a lot. The constitutionality of the jail, it must follow that, right? That it's a bedrock of our country. It's why we have public defenders and prosecutors, and in the middle they meet. Go next. I've got Munson and then Hawk.
Yes, I had a very specific question, and I really appreciate the colorful options of meeting dates. And I looked at the date of October 15th because the key said it's for the council's first budget reading, but it is also a date for, according to the timeline, for a public hearing. And is that all doable in one day?
I'm happy to address this question now, but I also go through it in the PowerPoint presentation, so I might hold off because
Let's save it.
there's 4 options, and I potentially point out issues with all 4.
Yeah, let's save it. Sorry.
It's a very good question. And again, everything on the timeline, there's probably some malleable flexibility there, but there's also pressures not to be too flexible. Councilor Hawk.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on what council attorney was saying about the difference in how we work together. We are, because of the way that the legislation is set up, we're all members of the local income tax council. But in this particular instance, we have 3 different income taxes that we can vote on without the assistance with the city. And that is the special purpose tax, that is the court operations tax, and this what we're calling the jail tax. So those 3 things we can do without the city's blessing. However, we still have to keep the court tax and this jail tax within that cap. So it does affect them. And because in most counties, I would say the majority, it is the county council who's the fiscal body, so you can weigh all that in. But we know that we have that cap of how far we can go, the entire county. And so if the city should raise theirs, and then that could preclude our being able to change ours.
Right. Yeah.
Our funding and how we do what we do is very well, I'm not going to say very well, but it is very distinctly scripted by Indiana law and the limits and what you can and cannot do. And even when you think you're right, you may get a different interpretation later.
Really need
So the preciseness of all this, including the deadlines that Ms. Turner King will get into, you can't just willy-nilly in December 1st someday just say, hey, we're going to do this. There's before and after and effects. Any other questions here? And if not, I think we'll move to that procedure discussion on a taxing. Ms. Turner King, and I think she's got slides to share.
Okay, so in preparing this PowerPoint, there's 4 objectives. I wanted to review the adoption timeline and the rate effective dates, review the procedure for any adjustment to the already existing tax rate, kind of gauge council preferences in regard to scheduling of future hearings, and then I propose 4 calendar options for consideration. So, first, the correctional tax falls within the county's expenditure rate, and that's governed by Indiana Code 63662.7. And that code section provides for the possibility of a tax that may not exceed 0.2%. Depending on when you adopt that tax is when the rate change will go into effect. So if we adopt it by August 31st, which in all honesty is highly unlikely, it would go into effect October 1st of 2024. But if you adopt a tax between September 1st and October 31st, the tax will go into effect January 1st, 2025. And if it's after that October 31st date, the tax goes into effect October 1st of 2025. But similar to the situation where we were last year when our tax went into effect October 1st, distributions wouldn't start until January 1st of 2026. It's important to remember with the passage of that correctional tax, there's a timeline, and that timeline has already started ticking. So the tax can be in place for 25 years, and that 25-year timeline started the moment we implemented it last August. So procedurally, before I get into the procedure, this is the same procedure we followed last August. We ran through it with DLGF to confirm we were doing everything right. So these assumptions are based on that the guidance somehow hasn't changed, which I don't think happened. So, first we'd have to publish the proposed ordinance with a specific rate at least 10 days prior to the public hearing. After publication is made, you'll have probably the first reading and the public hearing. Now, similar to last year, the tax could pass at the closure of the public hearing if it passes unanimously. If it's not unanimous, then there's a second reading of the ordinance. Yes, Ms. Munson.
Is there a specified time lapse between the first and second readings?
No, you could literally have the first reading on a Monday and then the second reading on a Tuesday.
Okay. It may be helpful and useful to know that.
Once the ordinance is passed, the auditor will send notification to the local taxing units within 15 days. The local taxing unit is the county, so last year the auditor's office sent an email to the commissioners, and that was a pretty quick process. And then once all of those steps are done, we would submit it to DLGF, and we have to provide documentation of the public notice, the ordinance, and our notice to the taxing units. There's some important things I would note in keeping in mind with this timeline. Unlike the practice that we usually follow with appropriations or budgets, we can't advertise a high rate. So you couldn't say a tax up to 0.2% or 0.02. You have to give the specific rate. And that notice, the ordinance is published 10 days prior to the public hearing. If at the public hearing or after the public hearing, there's a change to that proposed ordinance, it re-triggers the start of the process. So we'd have to do public notice and another public hearing. So once the first notice goes out, any changes restarts the process.
Really
so in the proposed calendar that I'm going to put up, I've built in enough room that there is the opportunity to have that second public hearing just in case we need it, because I'd rather plan for it and not need it than not plan for it and blow our deadline. I do think as we move forward with working with the council in this process, it's important to kind of gauge your guys' preference on a few items. And I put up a couple questions to kind of do that. So I assumed that you would like the public hearing during the evening hours to provide the greatest opportunity for public participation. This, in essence, makes it so that the public hearing can occur on a Friday since the room is only available during the day. Is that a fair assumption that you'd want it in the evening hours? I'm seeing head nods, so.
Yes.
I believe that's a very fair assumption.
Does the same assumption apply for the adoption hearing? So typically during the adoption hearing, there's not public comment because the public has already had the opportunity to comment at a public hearing. So one consideration for council is, would you be okay having an adoption hearing during the day on a Friday? And when you see the calendar, those options exist for the adoption hearing. Then third, with the impending budget seasons and sessions and hearings coming up in combination with the regular council meetings, is it the council's preference for the public hearing to occur on its own night? And what about the adoption hearing?
I think the public hearing is most ideal on its own night.
Absolutely.
As a priority, unless, I just.
It could be long.
Yeah, it could be,
Depending on how many members show up.
yeah. We want to give that its due and space and timing.
And I kind of made that assumption in making the calendar, so I'm glad you said that.
Could have a crowd.
This is just a DLZ timeline reminder. Prior to the meeting, Jeff and I did talk to DLZ. Although it's not ideal for them to not have a budget by mid to late October, if they didn't, they could kind of move forward, but they would be assuming that we'd be at the minimum budget. Again, not ideal. So we want to try to get them a budget as quickly as we can. And I think Mr. Carnegie was going to be online, so I would invite him to correct me if that is somehow incorrect.
Yeah, if it's incorrect, raise your hand. If it's correct, no need. Yeah, Mr.
Yeah,
McGinn.
sorry, just on the 130 million, is that just for the jail, or where does that figure come from? Because the materials we had last been presented, I think, had a $180 million scenario and a $200 million scenario.
That's what I thought too.
And so the 130, I don't know what all that.
Entire project.
Yes, for the entire project.
Because
yeah.
we started out at 70 million.
It looks like they're each 70 to 80 million plus software costs.
I think that came from the edit bonding capacity is my memory.
Okay.
So I think the edit bonding
what I remember.
capacity is roughly in that
Okay,
amount.
so that's how you establish the minimum. It's what the income stream that we already have. Okay.
And that's
Thank you.
that assumes, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, that assumes bonding with no tax increase. Is that correct?
I think it assumes bonding without a correctional tax, and it's solely based on edit.
Yes, thank you.
No, that makes sense.
Thank you. Yes,
And
Council
does,
Munson.
and does that bonding limit include all our other bonds? All bonds?
That would just be
Just the jail.
using
not
the
bonds.
edit.
Okay.
That would be the amount. And again, I didn't look at those pieces of paper before I came down here, but my memory is that is approximately what the project would be solely under the edit.
Okay.
I mean, those numbers,
Utilizing-
that number makes sense now that I look at the edit, the FSG.
And I think that utilizes some of the cash balance that's already built up into it. I think.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, that's not a realistic. That's a teeny tiny jail and a teeny tiny justice annex. That's, I don't think that's realistic, but I just wanted to know where that
Which number is unrealistic?
130 total
Would-
for total project.
Why? And are we now looking at it all coming out of edit and not out of?
No, I think they were just saying that that's if we don't know if we don't establish a jail tax, this is the only assumption the DLZ can work on is what the
Yeah.
income stream we already have, which is edit.
Yeah. But by the way, I just want to say this for public watching, what you're literally seeing is the council working through the details to figure out what they need to get from muddiness to get to more certainty. So you're literally seeing that process and appreciate your patience through it. Councilor Iverson.
And I think Councilmember Kim raises a really good point to focus on here is that the slide on the screen is talking specifically about the jail. And there are, when we talked with FSG for the long-term finance committee, we talked about two pillars here, and this is one of those pillars. So just keep that in mind as we're going through here. This is one of the pillars.
Very good point. Ms. Turner King, you want to keep going?
Go to jail for 130.
Okay, so now I'm going to present 4 possible timelines that the council could use to adjust the tax rate. And as I previously stated, each timeline kind of incorporates the room for a second hearing in case we need it. Sorry. Okay, there it goes. So option 1 is that basically at the next council meeting on the 27th, the council would identify the rate to be advertised. This would allow council staff to get submission to the paper of the ordinance on the 28th, and then publication would occur on September 4th, which then makes the public hearing on the 16th, which is that first yellow square. I guess I should probably explain the color coding here for the public because I don't have the key there. So the kind of neon green squares are already scheduled budget sessions. The pinkish square is a regular council meeting. And then red squares are available dates, and then blue squares are dates that the room is only available during the day, so it's basically any Friday. So first option assumes a council decision no later than the August 27th meeting. Our first public hearing would be on the 16th. If there's no amendments to that proposed ordinance, then you could pass it or consider it for adoption anytime after the 16th. If there is an amendment to that ordinance, it would in essence then make a second public hearing on the 7th of October, and then any adoption thereafter on October 7th, which also leaves room kind of if we need to have, if the ordinance doesn't pass unanimously. This is probably the most ideal timeline because it kind of takes advantage of the time frame in between budget sessions and when we really get into budget work. So I think the drawback to this is I do believe Council Munson has already notified us that she would be unavailable on October 7th. And so that second public hearing, then you have one person out. And as a reminder, in this instance, since you would be voting on a tax rate, you wouldn't be able to participate virtually.
And I will be out the entire week of October 21st.
I factored that in too.
It's really hard. I don't have my plane tickets yet, so.
So this is option one.
Option one.
Option one. All right.
So option one gives us the earliest.
It gives us
revenue
plenty of
date.
time for wiggle room if we need to have multiple hearings. I mean, it gets us furthest away from that October 31st date if that's really the hard deadline that council's looking at. And again, it's not a hard deadline, but if you pass the tax after October 1st, collection isn't going to begin until 2026, and then we're losing time on that timeline.
That's what we don't want to do.
So option two here, I added option two because it gives council a little bit more time into making that decision. So, and under this,
I think we're seeing option three. If we can go back a slide.
minute ago it was going slow and now it's advanced too fast. All right, there it goes. Option two requires council to identify a tax rate prior to basically September 5th. And so you could talk about it on your meeting on the 27th or during or after a budget session on the 3rd, 4th, or 5th. Basically, this would require us to submit notice to the paper by September 9th with publication on the 12th, and then our public hearing would be on the 23rd. If there's no amendments, you pass it after the 23rd. If there is amendments and we need to have a second hearing, again, that October 7th date is probably what you're looking at, or the earliest date you could have a public hearing.
That would be the earliest date?
Yes,
The 7th.
for a second public hearing.
Yeah, for
The
a
first public hearing is on the 23rd. Now, the drawback on this is we deliberately arranged budget calendar to not include any meetings that week of the 23rd to the 27th because that's the auditor's conference week. So that means that our auditor and Kim would probably be virtual.
Wow, that's tough, guys.
So we have to work around Jeff Kemp's calendar.
Yeah.
Yes, but he's out in October, so this would be a hearing in September. So option 3 requires council to identify a tax rate to be advertised by the 10th of October. And again, you have those budget sessions, and then the 10th of September, not October. The 10th of September, you have a council meeting. We would just have to get notification or submission to the paper by the 11th. So this could be an agenda item at that regular council meeting. This would then put the first public hearing on October 7th. No amendments, you pass it anytime after October 7th. With an amendment, we're kind of getting really close to the 31st deadline because that second hearing would occur on October 21st. That's the week that Jeff McKim, I believe, is unavailable.
Yeah.
So that's a potential issue with that. So in essence, if we had two public hearings under this scenario, I don't think you would have a full council at either of those public hearings. Option 4 is the option that kind of is contemplated by the timeline, but in looking at it and trying to plan for the possibility of the second hearing, I think it's the worst possible option.
What's it?
So under option 4, you make a decision anytime before September 18th. And then that would allow publication of the hearing notice on September 25th. You would have a public hearing on the 15th. And then if a second public hearing is required, you're doing it on the 31st of October. Now, There are tons of issues with this calendar, which is why I think it's the worst option, because October 15th is a regular session and your first reading of the budget. So now you have a public hearing on an already busy council meeting, and it kind of takes away from the purpose of the public hearing. The public hearing lacks a focus there. And then if we have to have a second public hearing because there is an amendment to the ordinance, we will be passing it on the day of, which means it has to pass unanimously on the 31st. And then after it passes unanimously, our auditor will be rushing for submission that day of. And while we're doing all of that, we're right in the middle of budget season, so it's taking away from budget submission because, as you will remember, we moved budget, the adoption of the budget to the 28th of October, which is kind of what that silver square is representing. So really the focus of staff being the auditor and Michelle that week becomes making sure we get our budget submitted. So again, option 4, worst case scenario.
Councilor McKim.
So it appears that basically what drives all these calendars is how soon we can come to a consensus on what rate to advertise.
Yes.
And so what that means is that we're going to have to come to a consensus, even if you don't think you could vote for that you might not vote for that at the end. So because we can't do a vote before we do a vote, right? We have to we're going to have to come to a consensus on at least what we think is the best compromise, the most realistic rate that has a chance of passing, even though somebody might themselves not commit to voting for it at that point.
And then this last slide just kind of does a side-by-side comparisons of those 4 calendar options to show you when you'd have to make a decision by, when the first public hearing would occur, and when the second public hearing would occur.
And I just want to, and I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but to follow up on Councilor McKim's statement, our question among all details is on this rate, the public hearing, the adoption to bring the revenue in for a project that is, again, that flexibility and items being determined and the gravity of that is sort of hitting all that to make those things determined, right, upon that amount.
So once the council determines a rate, I can advertise it, and then even if you determine the rate, you think about it, you hear the public hearing comments, all 4 calendar options have the ability to change it and allow for a second hearing. So we just need a starting point.
Is that all you've got for your portion?
Yes.
So let's, I've asked the auditor, because we've got our funding portion. We also have the impact that it could have. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Munson.
So maybe before the auditor, I just have a question. It looks like October 7th, at least in options 1 and 2, and 3, are for the second public hearing. And the public has already had an opportunity to respond, right?
Yes, in those scenarios, October 7th is a second public hearing, and it only would be necessary if after the first public hearing, there's amendment to the proposed ordinance. If the proposed ordinance is not amended at the first public hearing, then you could adopt any time after that date, so not necessarily October 7th.
Okay, so I just wanted to throw out the possibility of having that second public hearing because there's an amendment on the 8th, which is our regularly scheduled budget meeting, because we've already gone through most of the process, to see if that is something that we should at least consider. And I don't know what's planned for the 8th, so.
The 8th is the public hearing, the 8th is the public hearing for the budgets.
And usually that's the reading, is that the first reading?
No, this is public hearing
Okay.
for the budgets. The first reading is not until the 15th.
Okay,
So you could have 2 public hearings that night.
so we could have 2 public hearings that night.
Yes.
And that might make some of the taxpayers pretty happy. They
Right,
get
get
to
it
weigh
done.
in on everything.
I agree.
Yes.
Okay, so I like to throw that out as a possible consideration.
my takeaway from the options are there are options. It is compressed, there's no doubt. But if the council has a mind to what they want to advertise and the dates by which they wish to do it, it is doable on this August 16th day to kind of contemplate.
I really
that
like
out.
getting the
Yeah.
money. as fast as possible. I like getting
Any
money
other
as
questions
fast
for
as
that?
possible.
Because I'm going to keep us
Plus
moving
that
if not.
revenue coming in.
Let's, we've got this, the funding portion, what that can do. The auditor has been very good and deliberate about assisting us with the impact to taxpayers. She's prepared a graph, and I'll invite her to make any comments on that. So this would be correctional lit changes from current and beyond. So I'll let her share that and discuss.
Michelle, oh, thank you. Okay, so you're seeing on the screen right now a chart to demonstrate the fiscal impact of correctional lit different allocations. So where it stands currently there is highlighted in green, and that is at 1/100%. So the total amount received is currently is $424,260. So you can see we have different income scenarios there and the impact to the taxpayer where it stands now. And then we have option A through D, just different options, the estimated amounts the county would receive at that time, and then the impact to the taxpayer based on different income levels. I mean, it's very simple, but I think it, gives you a clear understanding of the impact.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Counselors, any questions on that? It's fairly clear.
Very, very much appreciate having this.
Sure.
Okay. All right. With that in mind, we've looked at timeline, we've discussed the tax ordinance procedure, a lot for counselors to think about, and now the correctional tax impact. We're going to open this up to discussion. And this is the opportunity for counselors to begin talking about ideas that you have, things that you're pursuing in this process of helping us figure out this timeline and deadline. So I'll open that up. Counselor McKim.
Yeah, thank you. So Kim and Courtney, I sent you that document that we had received earlier. Can we put that up? This is one that was, I think distributed to the council maybe at a executive session that I wasn't present at. But in any case, we've all had the opportunity to have this document, and it's kind of a notional budget for the jail for and courts for several scenarios. So first of all, Mr. Cockrell, would you mind sitting up there? Just so is that okay? Yeah. Jeff up here, just so he can join us.
Jeff, do you know what page you want to be
Yeah,
on?
let's do the first. I mean, it's only 2 pages. Let's do the first page first.
Okay.
And so is this, first of all, is this the best information that we have so far?
It's the best I have.
Okay.
So y'all may have other thoughts. I just kind of want I feel like this is
I don't recognize this in my sheaf of financial paper. Can they send this out after the meeting to us by email?
Yeah, this was presented at the lit meeting that earlier so it's in you've received it a couple times now. So
But you have it now because
yeah, and I can send it out. Yeah. So, but I just wanted to let everybody know this is not new to everyone. This has been forwarded, and I think we even have it on our
copy for a long time.
Is it in on the website? But do you recall what meeting that was from?
Right, and then
Do we have a
May
hard copy?
28th.
Do we have a hard copy of that available for us?
Yes.
I'm having trouble seeing the screen.
Me too.
Okay, Cheryl would like a hard copy as well.
Sorry about that. We just can't read it.
And my laptop won't open up, so I can't even.
Let's do this. Let's take a recess so we can kind of get all these things, and we've got plenty of time. So we'll take a 5-minute recess or so.
Oh, thank you.
Come back at the call of the chair.
No, I agree. It's hard to read like that, so I agree.
Well, I like to take notes.
We're going to come back together and pick up. We've got a document here that Councilor McKim is going to talk about a few things related to.
Thank you. Okay, so just to explain this, and again, these aren't my numbers. These are numbers that have been provided by Mr. Cockrell. There's basically there's 4 scenarios. The one page is a 400-bed jail scenario, and the other page is a 500-bed jail scenario. And then there's for each there's 2 columns. There's basically a $180 million conceptual budget and a $200 million conceptual budget, and it shows where we wind up with both of those scenarios. Both pages assume a justice center that I believe is approximately 50% larger than the existing justice center. Is that the way you interpret the estimated square feet required for 50% growth?
Yes, and that was based upon kind of looking at what we had and just made an assumption that we're going to want 50% more space. There wasn't any magic to that number other than that was a starting point where we were looking at.
Okay, so that at least is kind of a 1 degree of freedom that could be varied if need be. And so what that kind of shows is that in the 400-bed scenario, so first of all, just looking at the 400-bed scenario, we wind up with approximately $79 million for the jail and $79 million for the Justice Center. So they're about the same with the 400-bed jail and the Justice Center. And with that $200 million budget, we wind up with just a tiny surplus. So essentially, it looks like the budget, the $200 million notional budget, can kind of comfortably accommodate the 400-bed jail and the increased justice, the 50% increased justice building. You agree with that? And then if we go to the 500-bed, flip the page to the 500-bed jail scenario, then the jail goes up to $101 million. And this scenario still has the same assumption for the justice building, so it's still $79 million. And so this scenario shows a $20 million deficit in the $200 million budget and a $36 million deficit in the $180 million. So what that says to me is that given these assumptions, given the Justice Center 50% increase, a $200 million budget could definitely accommodate the 400-bed and possibly the 500-bed jail. And I know we've already talked about wanting to do several different bid scenarios where the contractors would have the option to bid on several different options. So I guess I kind of want to throw that out there because I've heard others suggest lower numbers. And I guess I just wanted us to have some numbers in front of us. So if anybody has other numbers they want to throw out, we can kind of compare and see where that lends us.
And let me ask you a brief question while other members think about that. So under that scenario, if you were to assume a $200 million total for the project, that would mean that economies within that, and I'm probably not using that term right, but decision making within that could affect decision making about either capacity or program or all sorts of different options depending on how that sort of works out with the project. Am I saying this correctly?
I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. All right. So it's sort of the way you got a budget, you've got multiple goals, you're picking those goals and making decisions to get to an end piece. All right. Counselor Iverson.
And I want to talk about one of the assumptions that's on this sheet, which is the assumption that we're at that 20% level. So FSG back in the long-term finance had recommended we go up to that 2/10 level. And to what Councilor McKim was pointing out, that at that 500 bed level, that assumption shows that there is still that deficit, both at that $200 million budget and $180,000 million budget. So that assumption that we're going to be at, that tax rate, I think is important to note. But let me stop there. Yeah.
And actually, I just wanted to follow up on that and actually ask Mr. Cockrell on this. So we know that the jail tax can only be spent on the jail.
Correct.
Would those soft costs Is that something that can reasonably be, prorated, divided 50-50? Do we have to be more careful about dividing it than 50-50?
I would think that they could be prorated. I also would think that given both, well, I don't know off the top of my head what the full amount of the jail tax would raise as far as bonding. But it seems pretty easy to me that they could be allocated, I think, on a percentage of the total cost of the soft costs, the purchase of the land, the architect's fees, the engineering fees, all those fees could be prorated based upon projects, the project bids.
Okay.
And so they can come out of the edit, right?
The edit could pay for anything you're doing. Either one of these sides, the edit could pay for. The correctional tax can only be utilized for the correctional facility itself. So it could not be used for the justice components.
Okay, how about the soft costs of
I think we'd have to,
the prorate?
I think we'd have to be able to make a logical argument of why that soft cost is associated with that.
Well.
And I don't think that'll be difficult.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. So,
Go for it.
so another question. Highlighted in yellow, the financial deficit. I'm looking at the 500 bed capacity and to meet future growth plans. Is that finishing out an unfinished wing of the jail, or what exactly is this future growth plan?
I think the yellow line represents how much of the budget for a 136,848 foot justice facility, which is 1.5 times what we currently have,
Yeah.
how much less you'll have to have that function. And I think if you look at the line below that, and I'm looking at the 500 bed capacity, the 180 million, that would still leave for a approximately 74 to 75,000 square foot justice facility. That is approximately 18.2% smaller than what those functions currently have as of today in current county facilities.
And so it basically takes the deficit overall and then allocates it entirely to the justice facility and says, okay, if we zero it out, this is what we wind up in with the justice facility.
Correct.
Assuming the jail is fully funded.
Assuming.
The jail is fully funded. In other words, that figure doesn't adjust the jail capacity down. It just adjusts the justice center capacity down.
Councilor Wiltz.
So when these numbers are calculated and when we're talking about the justice center component of the project, does this include all of the justice offices and departments that we have? Or because I've heard arguments for co-locating just certain things like the courts, but not necessarily prosecutor and defense.
I think the assumption, the 91,000 square foot assumption of what is currently in the justice includes the space for the prosecutors, includes all the justice related spaces. So that is where that number is derived from.
Probation.
Yes, it would include the probation space. I believe it includes community correction space. And I know there's a whole dialogue that needs to happen on where do all these things rightfully belong at the end of the day, but the assumption for the existing justice facility, the 91,000 square feet, includes all that.
91,000, there it is. That's the existing. Got it, thank you.
So that is an opportunity if counselors wanted to lower the amount, you could adjust that square footage.
Councilor Iverson.
Again, just a point of order. You can see on the screen on the very bottom, that's what we're talking about. We just scrolled down so you could see that. And for those watching at home or on CATS, you can find this document on today's calendar entry at co.monroe.in.us. This is a lot of information, and it's helpful to look at it while we're talking about it.
This is good discussion. Other comments or questions, counselors? Counselor Wiltz?
So I know that we've been given information on, I believe FSG gave it to us, about our funding sources needing kind of the two pillars and how much those sources can fund, pay for this. That's kind of a key connector piece that I'd like to remind ourselves about or talk about. Does someone have that? I
have it right.
I'm looking at it too.
Counselor McKim's got it, and I believe FSG is here. They asked the auditor for some documents to prepare.
But they did send a report in, let's see, what's it dated? June 19th.
Yep.
That I think has these scenarios exactly.
There's also an email from July 24th that has similar information.
Are you able to share that?
Trying to find it.
Let's give it a second. Thanks to our staff for all the documents you are grabbing, producing, and figuring out here. We appreciate it.
I mean, basically, just in short, they're showing an $85 million jail lit bond and 112, almost $113 million edit bond.
And while we're waiting for that, would it make sense to have, because we talked about that $130 million figure that we, for the, and I think it's going to be on the next slide, would it make sense to have a column here with 130 to kind of demonstrate what that would mean in these two scenarios?
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I would
So
like
that's kind of the, if you do nothing with that other source,
Yeah.
here's what
Yeah.
what the expectation would be.
Do we have a list of money already available? Is that on this, one of these charts?
The FSG report pretty much already takes into account the 2024 collections, the 2025 collections.
Here it is.
And actually puts forward an amortization table for each of these options.
Counselor McKim, is this the one you're
Yeah, it's
talking
that
about?
page is probably
Yep.
the most useful, but
That's
you
it.
don't want to zoom in. Yeah.
All right.
Well, this, what date is that? Could you
Seven-
scroll up to the
Yeah.
top?
724.
Whoops.
This should be June 19th.
Oh, yeah,
is
sorry.
the date of this report.
Just scroll up to the top page. It has
That's
a
what I'm
date.
trying, my computer's, yeah, June 19th.
There we go.
Oh, want this page here?
Maybe I'm seeing June 20th. I bet that's what it is.
I think this is good because you see the column for just jail lit option number 1, the county share of the edit option 2, and then those two combined for option number 3.
And
you
that's
can-
where we get that 130 pillar, right?
Assuming that we max out the jail lit amount.
The question was, this chart makes the assumption that we move the jail lit up to 0.2%, and that is my understanding about these numbers.
Yeah, I believe that's the case.
Is the 24th one different? Because I thought there were some changes made between the two that made it more accurate.
You know, those numbers are not the same as the ones I'm
Yeah,
looking at either.
I
What
think
are they?
Yeah, there was an email that I think Kim sent out to all of us.
That's what I just opened.
Yeah.
What's the date on that?
Review the letter. The 24th of July.
Well, see,
Yeah,
I'm limited on what I
that's
can
it.
pull up from here.
That's the most recent one that Kim
No.
sent out.
It has two.
Do you see 85 million
Yeah.
for the jail lit?
The PDF that's on there is still the June 19th document.
It still says June 19th. It's there.
They corrected
It's
it.
actually updated to 724.
Okay.
I can't get Teams to do anything but show.
Yeah, Kim sent it.
June 19th.
Under FSG documents, but it's.
Well, let me check. Let me see. Oh, maybe Courtney sent it. I don't know.
Peter's forwarding it.
Kim sent it. Kim sent it on July 24th.
July 24th?
Yep.
And Michelle is trying to pull it up for everyone.
Okay.
I just forwarded it.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
I can also share. I have it up. I think Jeff does too.
We'll see.
I guess
buried in
I have a
here,
question
and
for
I
council
don't
while
have
they
access
kind of
to it
figure out
because it's
this
in
chart
the-
situation. I've been asked to see if council would consider or like to provide guidance to Mr. Cockrell and I to move forward with appraisals of appropriate property on Vernal Pike and discussions with property owners. I see people raising
Hands going
I'm not
up. I
joining
assume
the
the
meeting.
hands means no questions. You agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay,
The
so-
information we've seen.
And specific to this discussion is the flexibility of the ED lit and the very real impact that us spending less on purchasing a property will provide more for whatever else we
Jail
want to
and
do.
courts, Co-location.
Exactly.
Everything.
Less taxes for the people
And
paying.
exactly
Yeah.
right. And it's imperative. I mean, absolutely.
So if you,
My understanding is assessment and
That's, Kim, you've got.
and a
it there.
free
that it?
in phase one were sort of offered. I don't see why we haven't already called them. Maybe we have.
Okay, go ahead, Councilor Munson.
So I was just talking with President, excuse me.
I want to make sure
Sorry.
the public hears all this.
Gotta get my mic off there.
Sorry.
I was just talking with President Deckard at the break, and knowing that we need to have the environmental information to make any decisions. So at the same time, as these other initial steps are done, since the owners have offered to cover the, at least the first phase of the environmental work, we should ask for that to be done immediately. If that's.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And
Yeah.
this is really helpful.
Well, I think
Is that
the
enough guidance?
I think the availability of that other property changes the dynamic too. I mean, I think there was a
absolutely.
legitimate
The two of
concern
them.
that the one by itself was not big enough. I
Yeah.
get that. And
Yeah.
but the availability of the adjoining property means we can't at least not look at it.
On the council, and we've said this pretty consistently, and I know people maybe get a little frustrated as we do all this, but our role is the funding portion of this. And we're often reminded that in a lot of different ways. And part of that is figuring out how to get the best cost for the service, a good service to the people of the community. Councilor Iverson.
Kim's got, by the way, the information we were talking about.
Before we pivot to this, I just want to point out that the address shared with us on Tuesday night for this additional property was 3241 Woodyard Road here in Bloomington, Indiana.
Is that correct?
That was the address shared in our Tuesday meeting. So
and I don't want to belabor this a whole lot, but I reached out to Mr. Spoonmore. He sent me the parcel numbers that they were talking about at the commissioners meeting. I forward those to the DLZ to have them do a brief, hey, does this, on the surface of it, look like it makes sense? So it's part of a process. How far that process goes, I don't know, but I can tell you that it's not sitting on a desk.
That's great.
I really appreciate that
Me too.
the commissioner's office is moving forward on it, and at least looking at it. I think that's great.
Councilor Iverson.
no, I think we've got the right numbers on the screen.
Just one thing before we do that, I want, since we're talking about multiple things here, and I want to make sure
Yeah. Let's
we're
get back
keeping
to
it
our
straight, because
agenda.
if we struggle, the public will definitely. I'm going to find the parcel numbers and read that into the record so that a member of the community can look that up through our county GIS, and they can consider it. I'll find that. I'll come back to that in a moment. I apologize, I don't have it handy.
You want me to just read them out?
You got them?
Yeah, I got them
for
in a text from
So members of the public, this is parcels on or near Vernal Pike, Curry Pike, and Woodyard Road that have been offered this week and in other discussions for potential consideration for these co-located facilities. Mr. Cockrell.
There are 3 different parcel numbers. The first one is 53. I'm just going to read it without dashes. 5304254000.0000011. The second one is, I'm just going to read them with dashes because I think
It's easier.
I think people are not going to, people who want to go look at it are going to need the dashes.
Yeah.
So I apologize, but the second one is 53-04-25-400-005.000-011, and the dashes would be in the same places in the first number I read. And the last one is 53-05-30-300-036.000-004. The first one is approximately 45 acres, the second one is approximately 14 acres, and the third one's approximately 53 acres. So
Thank you very much. I also want to say thanks to the B Square Bulletin for producing a map that
That was
illustrated that. I don't know if the Herald Times will follow suit on that, but it's helpful for members of the public to look at that as well. All right. So we've done that. Now let's go back to, we're going to go off those parcels in our requests, which we confirmed with to follow up on that with due diligence. Here are the pillars, and we'll take it from here. Counselor McKim, did you want to?
Well, no, just these are the numbers we've been talking about. The leftmost column is just the jail lit. The middle column is just the county share of the edit with the existing rate. Now, of course, the city could change that rate. They could raise, probably more likely to raise it than reduce it. And then the third is combined. And you'll notice that the jail lit, those numbers do assume that we have cash collections in 2025. So that basically assumes that we meet Ms. Turner King's timeline and establish any jail tax by the time we can. And just remember that the jail lit can only be spent on the jail, but the EDIT can be spent on either. So it looks like if we used all of the EDIT there and the maxed out the jail lit, we'd have about a $200 million bond. We'd have $230 million in usable funds. So we could go a little bit below that and still be able to meet that $200 million budget from what I see.
Which was Mr. Garitas kind of recommended that, right? For just as practice.
Mm-hmm. I thought he recommended that we didn't take it quite. What was he said? You could go this, but I don't recommend it. Remember when he said that?
Well, that would be literally max. That scenario would be maxing out everything.
Everything.
He was saying he did not.
So yeah, that would leave us no flexibility.
And that's where he said he did not recommend
Right.
it.
So essentially, tell me if I've got it wrong for people in the public watching, but option 3, he had said that's the maximum. As practice, do not do that. Or recommended that we not, although they.
That's what I heard.
Yeah. And one thing I as fiscal practice, anything maximum, what makes me nervous anyway for a variety of reasons, but beyond because future iterations of this council or a community or whoever may not have options to do things they have to do in those moments when you have maxed it out. It's just like at home, right?
Understanding, though, of course, that the city could increase the edit and
Yes.
that edit could increase. So that's not the max possible. That is the max possible jail. That is not the max possible edit.
Well said.
So we can't raise the edit.
I was gonna say, Charlie Joyce from FSG is on here if you want to direct a question to him.
Yeah, I see lots of hands. Mr. Cockrell, did you have a follow-up?
I think, because my conversation with FSU was a little bit different.
Okay.
What they indicated to me that this was the maximum that they would recommend. The maximum actually would be higher because then you disregard coverage and you do a property tax backup that you'll probably have to hit. So with these funding sources, this is based upon only paying 80% of the revenue towards the debt service. So there's still, you still have a 20% of the revenue that would be held back for if there's problems with the revenues coming in, or, once you build up a good enough nest egg that you could then spend it on other projects. So I just wanted to, I heard what you guys said, and that was different than my conversation. So I just wanted to point that out.
I mean, you're right. If you look at, if you scroll down there, you do see that 125% coverage.
Yeah.
Footnote that, that page.
Or ask Charlie to clear up which path we're.
Yeah, Charlie, if you have some comments here on this, we would welcome that. Yeah, a hand raised. So TSD, if you can unmute him.
TSD, can you please promote Charlie Joyce so that he can speak?
I did.
Needs to unmute then.
And maybe if you.
We don't hear anything. If you're talking, Charlie, we don't hear anything.
Maybe if I just read the statement from the letter that says, we recommend a combined maximum bond size of $198,270,000 and possible cash contributions from the 2024-25 income taxes of $30,984,468 for a total of $229,254,468 total project cost. That's in the cover letter to this document.
Okay.
And Charlie's unmuted, it looks like.
The numbers that were just read are in combined option 3 right there at the top.
All right, Charlie.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
How we do?
Perfect. And I would say both discussion points are correct, that option number 3 that we have there is the maximum. But I would also add, Jeff is right that it's the maximum with the assumptions we used, including that coverage amount. So we've given ourselves some room there if income taxes were to go down or something would happen. We need some ability to have funds still for the debt service. So, and those jail income taxes can also be used for operating costs of the jail. So, which we may need or will most likely need as we go. So,
which could include, right? The sheriff says this is structured different. I need this to be different, and that would cover some of that.
Correct.
Okay. I saw a bunch of hands a second ago. I want to make sure I get to folks. Councilor Iverson, did I get you already?
I think I said what I needed to say, both that what Mr. Cockrell was reading from the cover letter to this document is that maximum amount on option number 3 that folks see on their screen right now. So I just want to bring this conversation full circle, that we've been talking about 2 pillars, that Ms. Molly Turner King gave a presentation on that first pillar, and here we see both pillars and then the combining those 2 pillars. So this has been a good conversation, and here we see everything kind of coming together. This is a kind of good summary slide for today's.
Well, and on that second pillar, the EDIT, that's where we first started talking about what essentially the minimum budget would be.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Not raising any additional taxes, just with existing revenue stream. That's where we'd be.
That's right.
So, can you get there to given the numbers we're seeing here? I mean, maybe the Justice Center doesn't need to be increased by 50%. I mean, that may be much larger than is needed. It's clear that there's not excess space now.
No.
So we know we need an increase. Do we need 50%?
To belabor the analogy, it's hard to keep a roof up with just one pillar.
Fair enough.
I'm veering into Trent Deckard territory here.
You're doing
I want to be
great.
careful.
Got to be careful with those. No, you're doing great. So, counselors, I'll open it up to this. Ms. Turner King has presented timelines, right? And we know to collect revenue, we've got to plan and plot a line. Does anyone have an idea on that?
Actually, I do have a question.
Go for it.
In general, with the bonds that we would typically go, well, let's say we did a jail lit bond. Would we be able to prepay? Or would there be a certain point after which we could prepay without penalty?
And Charlie, correct me if I misspeak, but typically we will build into, if this is anticipated to be a 20-year bond, we would build into at some point, probably 10 years, a period where we can refund that bond, which is, pay it off. Typically, you do that for one or two reasons. One, you can get a better interest rate and you just kind of refinance it. Two is you will issue a different bond, pay this bond off with it, and have almost like you're getting, when you mortgage your home to do an expansion on your house, you could do something like that.
I guess what I'm getting at is that, let's say the city does increase the edit substantially.
Is that what?
We're going to suddenly have a lot more money coming in. At a certain point, would we be able to pay off the jail bond early and then reduce the jail lit if we no longer need it for coverage of a bond?
And I will talk to bond counsel, but I believe what I'm about to say is correct, is that you could use edit money to help pay off things that the jail bond was designated for. The reverse is not true.
Sure,
Right.
understood. But it's the edit that we might wind up. I'm just speculating on what the city's going to do. I have no idea.
Or even the county gets revenue in other ways. So, for example, properties change, things.
As long as that revenue, it would be eligible for the work that was done with that bonding, I think you're fine.
I saw some hands flying up. Counselor Iverson, and then I'll go to Munson.
I'm going to make comment on Ms. Molly Turner King's presentation like you asked, but if there's, is that okay for me to proceed with that?
Yeah, Counselor Munson, did you have something related?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
I think based on today's conversation, based upon conversations we've had in the past, option number one is advisable. To get this done as quickly as possible, to have public conversation as quickly as possible, and to give the architect enough time to get their work done so that the construction costs don't just go out of control. My opinion would be to go with Ms. Molly Turner King's option number one.
Totally. I completely agree.
Let's make sure I've captured this. So on option one, it looks, I saw some nods from Counselor Munson.
We know there may be dissent.
Yes. I'm just trying to make sure I'm mapping this out. Counselor Munson.
I would like option one, but with the second hearing date to be on the 8th rather than the 7th, so I could be here,
That's important.
if that's all right with you all. Makes for a longer work night on the 8th, but there's also some advantages.
So adoption on the 8th
if needed.
under option one.
If needed.
Okay. All right, so I've got some folks floating around option one. Counselor Wiltz.
And I think I know the answer to this, but just to be absolutely clear, for the decision, the initial decision on the 27th, that just requires majority like anything else. I mean, that is just us,
that's
just a vote saying, hey, this is what we'd like to move forward with. The other types of things, where'd she go?
She had an appointment.
Okay.
She had to leave, so.
All right,
Yeah.
I'll stop trying to look at her then.
Oh, that's okay.
Well, tell her when she gets back, we've gestured a lot.
Yeah.
I believe the decision point for the August day is what do you want to advertise for the
Right.
public hearing?
That's okay.
I'm going to come to that discussion in a minute, but I want to hear other things on this options.
I was just
Counselor Crossley.
gonna say, I do think that option one is the best. But I do like the idea that Councilor Munson just floated around with her being here, of course. But because we already have that as a meeting set and public would be able to be here. Again, we are public servants and trying to do what we can. They have a good old meeting and we got a long one that we would be able to be at. So I do like that with the option of the 8th being there.
Other counselors on options? Thank you, counselors, for working through this. I know we're kind of, as I often say, moving slowly towards the door, holding hands, trying to figure out where we're at, and that's part of this process. Now let's move over to, does anyone want to comment on potential rate discussions? What are any thoughts on that? Counselor Munson.
A comment that I just want to throw out there for us to keep in the back of our minds is that we know jail expenses, operating expenses have increased substantially this year, and especially more so with the changes in salaries. And we need to keep in mind how we fund the operations, because our general fund is not going to be going up very substantially.
Thank you, Counselor Munson. Good point, well taken. I want to add to that just a little bit. We, in 1986, made a very conscious decision in this community to pursue a co-location. I don't know if how intentional that was, or just the solution did that, and our system has been that way since 1986, maybe even before if we count for proximity to the jail and to the courthouse when things were housed here. That is a choice that has been made. It's one that comes at a cost, and that's not lost. But I want to always remind folks that other counties aren't necessarily like that, but yet that has been a convenience to our system, which has helped to operate in a more efficient way for a million good reasons. But it does cost, and that extending that beyond the Justice Building comes into some of this.
That is a really good point. Co-location is not universal.
No.
Nor is it one thing. And that's what I was getting at earlier is, you know, the arguments about it being cost savings hold true for the courts being there, and maybe even some other things, but not necessarily for everything being there. And I'm not advocating one or the other. I'm just noting that, as you say, there's a lot of ways to do it, and they all have implications.
When the gravity of the economies of doing this, and I keep coming back to that word gravity, means that as this is contemplated and plotted out, the first wish and hope and dream of every entity in our system may not be fully achievable, because the weight of doing this within a set budget just means we don't do this, we do this, and this is our priority, and that should be shared equally in our judicial system, and I know they do a great job with that. Other discussions about rate areas. Counselor Wiltz.
I would like us to keep in mind that there is some validity to prudence in not maxing out what you can do with the first go round. So perhaps, you know, I would just encourage us to really think through not doing the full jail lit rate possible, knowing that we might be able to make a change to it later if necessary. I mean, we can do something slightly less than the max. We haven't seen information laid out very well for us in that other scenario, but we can maybe extrapolate or maybe get some more information on what does it look like if we do. I mean, we have the impact information from our auditor for less, but I mean the budget information on the other end. It's not unknowable. It's just not printed in front of me. And this is a huge ask of our residents. This is, and I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know I am. But I just want us to be thinking a little bit creatively about using, you know, we have a flexible ED lit that we can use and gives us lots of options. It can be used for all the different pieces, as opposed to a limited jail lit that can only be used for very specific items. Those items are critical. Those items are important. I kind of agree that we don't want to build to the minimum. You know, the $130 million budget. It's not going to give everybody what they want. I'm not worried about what people want so much as what is necessary to keep people safe and to meet the ACLU's identified requirements, which is just constitutional and safe. Like I said, we just have to. We get to pick a number. We reserve the right to maybe pick other numbers later, but by picking a number, there's so many possibilities still, and we're just looking at idealized scenarios, which I very much appreciate. There's a lot in between these numbers to think about. That's it.
Councilor McKim. Oh, Councilor Hawk.
Yes. I remember when we first started talking about this, this latest go-around, when we first started talking about this, and the city raised that edit tax. And there was a lot of gnashing of teeth about that. And I remember you saying, well, then if we use that, we won't have to raise that jail tax. Do you remember?
Yeah,
I remember
I
that.
literally thought that might be
that we could
an option.
cover what we had to do with that edit tax, which is brand new revenue coming in from the citizens to assist. And now it looks like as if there's a discussion, well, we'll keep all this edit coming in and we'll bring in this other millions someplace else. And we're not looking at the people who are paying that tax, who are really struggling, trying to put food on the table or gas in their car. I mean, I just have concerns about it, because if we thought, oh wow, we've got this edit money to pay for the jail, why are we now saying, well, no, we can't, we better tax something else just because we can? So, I mean, I want the whole project to work, but I also have to think about the people who are paying for it.
Right.
Councilor McKim.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but I don't think you could say we're considering raising the jail tax just because we can. It's because the edit doesn't raise enough money, or I don't think it doesn't likely raise enough money to be able to do the project. Now, maybe, we have now I think between this document from FSG and this document, we have enough information to come up with alternate proposals. I kind of feel like we have a bogey here, which is the $200 million budget, which can be, which can be created with all of the jail lit and most of the edit, and can fund the project. But then, anyone is welcome to come up with I think we have the information to come up with alternate scenarios. So, I mean, I would think that's the council's task now, is to look at the information we have, and if there's a configuration of these parameters that you think would make more sense, reduce the size of the Justice Center, for example, reduce the size of the jail, whatever. And then you have the ability to allocate between the jail tax and the edit tax. It's kind of a fairly constrained mathematical exercise now, in which anybody can come up with their own proposal for consideration.
And I recommend two counselors just based on that. If we go, and it sounds like a consensus area was around option one, and I'm mindful here in about 6 minutes another meeting starts.
For the Molly option one. Not this option.
The calendar option.
Yeah. So under option one, by August 27th, so later this month, we would identify that rate and follow that pattern. So what I would say to counselors, I mean, if you want to throw things out now, that's fine. We got about 6 minutes, 5 minutes. But I would ask you to think about what you will come into that meeting with on those options. And then this council, I'm going to try to keep us to an option one timeline, or I won't be doing my diligence in that. I can't guarantee what happens with that, but I want you to think hard about that. I also want to thank, we've had organizations that have reached out. I know New Leaf, New Life's here and given us input and thoughts, and community members, and we appreciate that greatly. I don't know that we always express that well, but we're taking it all in. For members of the community that have thoughts about property areas, all of these things, we appreciate that as well. Ultimately, the facility that we have, which is about a block that way, has been in this community, in and around it, and functioning around people for a very long time, and protected and guarded by some very distinguished deputies and very diligent public servants. As a little boy, I would spend many after-school nights while my mom did transcripts to make extra money as a court reporter, doing my homework and listening to the jail above me. I operated like that for 10 to 15 years, and I'm safely here before you. Wherever this goes, whatever form it does, it will be much like that, and we will get through it. So as you offer those comments, I offer that as a person who grew up with a mom I love more than life itself, literally 6 feet from all of that all the time. Okay? And so we'll take all that into account. Counselors, any other comments or questions? I'm hearing option one. We're going to do our homework on rates.
Yeah.
I'm going to grade them all, give you all no. Get your homework done, back to school time. And then thank you for media for covering this and showing it. This will be available on Cats to rewatch it. Okay? We good?
We're good.
We're adjourned.
Good.
Thank you.
Great job, Trent.